What's up, folks? Welcome back to the Whoop podcast, where we are on a mission to unlock human performance. I'm your host, Will Ahmed, founder and CEO of Whoop. On this week's episode, Whoop VP of Performance Science, Kristen Holmes, is joined by Dr. Andy Galpin. Dr. Galpin is a professor of kinesiology at California State University, Fullerton, and an expert in exercise science. He is also the director of the Center for Sport Performance at CSU Fullerton, where he conducts kinesiology and human performance research. Kristen and Dr. Galpin will discuss how to get started on a strength program. Spoiler, form can have a much greater impact, and it's not always about the bigger muscles. How to train differently based on desired results. 5 key areas here: skill, speed, power, muscle strength. The differences in training for longevity and human performance. They get into nutrition, sleep, the actual workout itself, how Andy works with his athletes, creating specific plans for superstars, and recovery tips, how best to stay injury-free. If you're new to Whoop, you can use the code WILL, W-I-L-L. When you're checking out, get a $60 credit on Whoop accessories. That's for new bands, battery packs, and more. That is join.whoop.com. If you have a question was answered on the podcast, email us podcast@whoop.com or call us 508-443-4952. Without further ado, here are Kristen Holmes and Dr. Andy Galpin.
Today I'm joined by exercise scientist and absolute expert in all things human performance, Dr. Andy Galpin. Dr. Galpin is a professor of kinesiology at California State University, Fullerton, where he also conducts human performance research as the director of the Center for Sports Performance. Alongside Dr. Galpin's teaching and research at Cal State Fullerton, he is a strength coach for numerous professional athletes, including NBA All-Stars, MLB MVPs, Olympic medalists, Hall of Famers from multiple sports, NFL Pro Bowlers, and more. Andy, a very warm welcome to the Whoop podcast.
No, man, quite an introduction. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we can't wait to chat today. I'd love to tackle the science behind resistance training, of course, and actually dig in a little bit on how wearables have really struggled to measure muscular load, so some of the limitations around that. And I also want to dig into how weight training can impact health and why it's important for everyone, whether one considers themselves an athlete or not. You know, how resistance training can really amplify health and wellness just generally. So perhaps to start us off, Andy, how do you define strength training?
Well, boy,
I know
I'm not sure how far you want me to jump
well,
off here.
we can just do an overview, and then we can kind of talk about adaptation and
Sure.
power, speed, hypertrophy, strength.
Yeah, the reason I sort of laughed there is that's actually, I'm giving away a little bit of a secret here. I am. So hopefully none of my students are listening, but one of the things I do in my senior level program design class, so this is a course where students are having getting an undergraduate degree in kinesiology, and they've taken multiple strength and conditioning courses, and this is senior/grad level actually.
Yeah.
And they're learning really detailed program design, like probably way more detail than we'll cover today. Well, one of the things I do in that course is I ask that question. And I ask, what's cardiovascular exercise? I ask, what's aerobic exercise? And you'll be stunned how there's like basically no ability to do so. You can't define them. They're extremely arbitrary in that they don't really have any meaning outside of either being extremely vague to where they're unhelpful or being so specific that they're, that not helpful as well. So I think colloquially, if you want to just define it as strength training, and the reason I say this is it could be body weight.
Right.
There are tons of highly effective strategies for just your body weight. So you can't say something where it's like, well, when you have external load. Like, no, that's not it. It's like, not at all. The gravity is plenty of an external load to do a bunch of strength training. So in general, I'll actually go the other direction, which is to not define like the strategies and parameters, what you have to do. It's actually the back-end adaptation or result. So it's any sort of training in which the primary goal is to enhance strength or force production. Those are interchangeable. Or muscle size or something equivalent. That's like the 3 ways to say it. It's strength, muscle size, or something equivalent, because you get in a lot of different directions as well. So that, I think, from the big picture, that's what we're trying to ultimately do. There are also plenty of other positive things that you can get, like postural improvements, like joint health, like tissue and connective tissue. So you don't want to just rank, you don't want to put it in something as small of a bucket as, well, this is only something you try to do if you're trying to get big and strong. That's something we fought 30 years to get people away from thinking. And so I want to be very careful at the onset to not set people up on that mistake as well. So that is like the biggest non-answer ever, especially in the first 5 seconds of a show. But
No, it's good. I mean,
that's
it's good to understand that it is hard to define, and it's maybe that we can narrow our focus a bit by, what are the adaptations we're looking to train when we start a strength program, and how are they achieved, at the mechanistic level?
yeah, sure. So you can bucket this a bunch of different ways, but I'll make it somewhat easy. And this is how I typically outline it. So the very first one you can think about is strength training is highly effective at skill development. What I mean, it is actually, if you think about just motor control or motor learning, this is your ability to control what your body does consciously or subconsciously. And so this is everything from unconsciously to things like posture, right? Fantastic. We know that that can happen. You have a whole series of muscles in your body that are what we call anti-gravity or postural. So this is your soleus, the small muscle that's on the back of your ankle goes to your heel. This is your spinal erectors, and they're meant to keep you erect and upright. Strength training is effective at either enhancing the strength of those, of course, but also just simply getting to fire and be more consistent subconsciously so that your non-paying attention to posture is improved. To the conscious side, it can be things like, again, a changing in movement pattern. So which muscle in your lower body fires first when you're squatting or bending or hinging? Which one fires second, third, fourth? All that is motor control and motor learning. It is, of course, transfers to skill. So your golf swing, your throwing of a javelin, any of these things are there. So I call that all skill development, which is simply teaching your body to move in a certain way or not move a certain way, both conscious and unconscious. Frankly, that alone is worth an entire series of discussion.
Yeah.
But I'll just capture that. And again, that's my way to acknowledge right out the gate. Strength training is not just about bigger muscles and stronger performance. It is about health. It is about maintaining and reducing injury risk, coming back from injury, et cetera, et cetera. And we can certainly talk more about that if you like, but I'll just call that all like movement skill.
Maybe talk about it from the lens of like neural adaptation. Because that, I think when I think about skill, I think about neural adaptation.
Yeah. So if you think about how, maybe we'll go back a quick step, how humans move. So most people think about it from the perspective of, I have to contract my muscles. Well, that's actually a 3-part series in order to get you to move. So the reality of it is nothing in your body moves unless your bones move. Like that's it, right? The only reason you have muscle for the most part in this context is to help bones move, right? Or not move. Hold them stable so that another part of the bone can move, right? So what we're really trying to do is move bone. In order to do that, it's a 3-part thing. Part 1 is there has to be some sort of signal. And this is the nervous system, right? This starts off with the central nervous system. This is either your brainstem or your spinal cord, and this could even be the different parts of your brain, whether this is an active movement, like you're trying to reach up and touch the camera intentionally, or you're just reacting, something hits your shoulder and you flinch. Like those are going to happen at different parts, but they're all in the central nervous system, which is the brain, brainstem, and spinal cord. Then you have the peripheral nervous system, and this is where they extend out from that central nervous system out to the end of the tip of the muscle. So this is the nerve ending that's going from the middle of your spine all the way to the tip of your finger. All that colloquially put together, we'll just call that the nervous system. So to not differentiate too much neuroscience right now, some signal has to come together, whether it is reactive to nature, whether it is conscious and somatic, and you're trying to control position. Step 1, nervous system. Step 2, then the nervous system has to tell muscle to contract. And so then the muscle has to, cause its contraction. And step 3, the muscle actually doesn't attach to bone. That's it's a big misunderstanding. That's not how it works. Muscle doesn't ever attach to bone, never once. It all comes together. In fact, all of your muscles are made up of millions and millions and millions and billions, in fact, of individual muscle fibers. Each muscle fiber has something wrapping around it that we call connective tissue. Those all bundled together, those are all wrapped around with more connective tissue. Those are all lumped together into a giant muscle, and those are wrapped around with connective tissue. And those are typically lumped together in like muscle groups, and those are wrapped around sometimes with connective tissue, sometimes not. But regardless, all that stuff comes together and fuses into things like tendons and ligaments. In this particular case, we're trying to attach to a bone. So if you think about something like the quadriceps, So you hit the quadriceps is 4 muscles on your thigh, right? That's why we call it the quad. Each one of them has their own wrapping, and they all come together at one point in the bottom or the front of your knee, rather, and they connect and form one particular thing that we call your patella. That patella crosses over the front of your kneecap and inserts into the front of your shin bone. So when you squeeze your quad, it pulls across the kneecap and pulls the front of your tibia up and extends your leg forward, right? So that piece, connective tissue piece, whether that's in the muscle cell or coming together to make those tendons, is what is required to actually move human body. So to really get back to your question now, we have three major players that have to be functioning correctly to move correctly. The nervous system, the skeletal muscle contraction, and then the connective tissue all have to happen there. And this is why, again, we can either use a neural change, like motor control. This is motor learning. This is why I call that like a motor units or the functional units of contract muscle. And so we just teach it, hey, fire this quad muscle a little bit before that quad muscle next time. Or in fact, fire the quad a little bit slower and let the hamstring go first, or whatever it is, right? So it could be within a muscle group, it could be within motor units in an individual muscle, or it could be just sequencing. So most people don't realize that when you do something like a bicep curl, so when your bicep muscles are curling, your triceps, which are behind your elbow, are actually contracting as well. And so if they both contract equally, nothing moves because the front and the back are contracting, right? And so one of the major adaptations that we know happens with strength training is you learn to turn your tricep off more effectively. And so you're able to, quote unquote, contract your bicep better, move it faster and more force, not because the bicep got any better. You just stop the thing that's behind it from, holding it back. And so you can imagine having like a tug of war and two sides pulling in the opposite direction, and then you just learn to have one side stop, and that's going to make the other side go faster. So that is one of them. There's sequencing things. There are firing rates. So the rate at which the individual neurons can fire can be sequenced properly. There's a whole host of neuroanatomy I actually walk you through. Neuromuscular junction, anything that happens in there between the acetylcholine release to the pre and postsynaptic cleft, the ligand gates, receptor sodium channels, all the way into the sarcoplasmic reticulum to the individual calcium sensitivity of the myosin. Like all this neuroanatomy, microanatomy rather, I could go into on the nervous and the muscular side. All of those things adapt. And this is what allows things like more strength and force production and speed independent of size. Right. So you can get stronger and produce more force without getting any bigger muscle, although those are highly related, with any of these neural or muscular adaptations. The same thing can happen with connective tissue. So improvements in the connective tissue side don't necessarily mean more muscle size, but would absolutely mean more force production there. So we have a whole cascade of ways we can move better, we can move faster, we can move more effectively, all the way from the individual nerve filing to the individual muscle fiber, to which muscle we fire in what sequence and what timing wise, to the angle in which the muscle is oriented to the bone. All things like that's called pennation angle. All adaptations like that occur to, again, either enhance or change movement in any way we want that are independent of just simple things like size or endurance. I don't know if that's where you're going, but that's a quick rundown.
No, that's amazing. And so how should we train differently if we're looking to, build skills like strength and power versus size, via hypertrophy, for example?
Yeah. So when we went back and we said, okay, there's these different adaptations, the first one we talked about was skill, right? Well, after that, just to finish that, because it's going to directly answer your question.
Yeah.
The next one is speed, then power, and then strength, and then muscle size. And then there's a bunch down the endurance, muscular endurance, and things on there. And so the reason I do those in those order is because really you don't want to think about these things as hard cuts. You want to think about these as very blended, overlapping adaptations. And I mean that to say, if you were to get better at skill, you're probably going to move faster. That alone. I don't actually need to improve the top end velocity capability of my muscle fibers for me to move faster as a human. If you look at like the track world, look at what Stu and Dan have done at Altus, right? You're going to hear them talk about things like you need to have a good rhythm. Like what? Like why do if I'm a 100-meter sprinter, what the hell does rhythm have to do? And then you get around those folks and you're like, oh,
Oh, yeah.
that's everything, right? Like,
Totally.
and any athlete is like, oh yeah, especially if you try to get faster, you know exactly what I mean when I just say that. So just the fact that you got better, more skilled, you probably move faster. But if you get more skilled, that will have zero bearing on your physical size.
Mm.
Like hypertrophy, like it's
Yeah.
not related. And so hypertrophy is at the end of that spectrum, because if you flag those two things, they're not going to do the same thing as if you add more muscle size. That is not going to change how you move, like at all.
Mm.
There's just no relationship there whatsoever. But there's a relationship between the first one and the second one, skill.
Right.
And then if you go from speed to power, what you realize is power is simply speed multiplied by strength.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you improve speed, you for sure have improved power. There's
Mm-hmm.
just no way around it.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also not the exact same thing.
Mm.
So once you go from power to strength, we see again, obviously I just gave you that formula, so you know clearly there's that relationship.
Right.
But just because you got stronger doesn't necessarily mean you got that much faster.
Right.
All right. And also, just because you got stronger, there's a skill component there. If you get more skill, especially if you look at like powerlifters or weightlifters, there is a lot to improving force production by just sequencing properly and moving in the right positions, right? But it's not as related to the first. So we start to like lose some overlap there, but there's still a heavy overlap.
Mm-hmm.
If we go to the last one here, which is hypertrophy, there is a huge overlap between size and strength. Huge. If you put in more contractile proteins and everything else is handled, you're probably going to be stronger. And the reason we know that is look at any strength-related sport,
Mm-hmm.
and they have weight classes. And there's a reason.
Right.
And what you'll see at the top end of the spectrum, like there'll be some random like outliers here, but in general, look at the world records in powerlifting and weightlifting. Every time you go up a weight class, those world record numbers will be a higher number. Like that's just how it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you get stronger without adding muscle size? Absolutely. We just talked about, no question.
Right.
But at some point, there is a relationship. That relationship is not one-to-one. For every pound of muscle you put on X amount of strength. No. But there is a huge overlap there. So when we think about that, then it's like, all right, now what are the principles that govern these adaptations? It starts to become easier to understand because you realize, well, actually, if I do something that maximizes hypertrophy, it's probably going to give me some strength. And if I'm going to maximize hypertrophy, then I also might get a little bit of power, but not that much because I'm pretty far away from speed and I'm pretty far away from skill.
Right.
If we go to the other, and I can give you numbers here in a second, no worry.
Great.
But like conceptually, don't help you
Right.
understand.
Sure.
If you go to speed, you also realize, okay, that's going to overlay on the power, obviously. That's going to overlay a little bit of strength because strength is force production. And force production is your mass multiplied by acceleration. So there is and if I'm trying to lift a weight and I can go faster, like that's going to help, but it's not a great relationship there. And you can see the relationship then to hypertrophy starts to really fall off. And so if you just land in strength training, like in the quote unquote, like pure strength training, you're going to get some, obviously maximizing strength. You're going to get some muscle gain and you're going to get some power potential gain. And so everything we're about to describe, again, I will give you numbers here in a second. I do realize it is not a hard cut. It's not a hard cut at all. In fact, one of the things that we talked about a lot is understanding how you can get multiple adaptations out of the same sort of training or close. And that saves you a lot of time, right? You can be super efficient. And if you understand exactly what you're doing programming or you work with a coach that does, you can actually get multiple adaptations in the same training phase or block or whatever, however you're breaking it down.
Yeah.
If you're very specific and understand these rules of crossover, is what I call them. So that's the big picture. Where would you like to go next?
I love that. Maybe if we could hit, so we, a lot of folks on our platform, and I think many of our listeners are, after health or after longevity. Maybe just talk about how to maximize that. So rep range, proximity failure, volume, like how would you, I think, advise, what would be the programming that you would advise if we're really after health and longevity? And then maybe how does that differentiate from performance? I mean, now, when I think about my Olympic career, like I was training very different as an Olympic level athlete versus now where I'm really trying to live as long as possible with a highest quality of life. So maybe just kind of talk about the differences between that and get as specific as you want in terms of like really being really prescriptive. So if I'm a listener, I want to be able to take away, how do I, if I'm trying to really increase performance levels, and I know that there's a lot of variation, a field sport versus a court sport versus a pool, like there's lots of different types of training within that, within the different sports. But if we think about it from a high level, how does that differentiate from just the health and longevity bucket?
Sure. What sport did you play?
Field hockey. And
Field hockey.
for the national team, and then I played basketball and field hockey in college at University of Iowa.
Oh, nice, cool, right on,
Yeah.
awesome. So you get this stuff. This is easy money for you.
Oh, well, yes.
All right.
I'm an exercise physiologist, so yeah, I spent a lot of time in this world for sure.
Great, awesome. I didn't know that. That's amazing. So makes sense. Okay, couple of caveats. One, this is just foundational pieces. All right. So if you're going to go back and I'm saying this to the listener, if you're going back and you have a strength coach or a trainer and they're doing something different than what I'm saying, please don't fire them. they may be totally right. Like, this is not the only way to ever do it. This is, friends, this is like foundational pieces. They work for a reason. They're very, very effective, but there are more advanced techniques. So if you have a coach you can work with or something, please, I get so many of these after Huberman. It's just like, thanks, bro. You cost me my job. Like, I'm doing this. I'm like, that's really good. Actually,
I know.
All right, sorry.
But there is.
Don't go do that.
It is important to know that. I think you mentioned the word foundation, and I think that's really important because you can layer inefficiency on top of inefficiency and get nowhere fast. So I think this foundation actually is really, really important. And to the degree that we can educate folks, you're at the tip of the spear, Dr. Galpin, in terms of your understanding and the frameworks that you've built and your success with athletes. So I think, we should be pricking up our ears right now and paying attention and ensuring that we are actually creating a foundation that enables us to meet whatever our goal is. So.
Correct. Yeah. There's that saying, something that people say Picasso said, or Einstein, or, just pick a famous person and say that they said, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's something to the effect of learn the rules like a master so you can break them like an artist.
Yeah.
Cool. That's totally true.
I love that. Yeah. And that's where the individual variability comes in. And, everyone's situation is, there's lots of different context and nuance for each person.
Yep.
But again, there are principles. And that's what we want to make sure we're
everything I'm about to tell you, I have broken and do break and will probably break today in my next athlete. Okay. So please acknowledge that. Now, we have a handful of variables, and these are what we call the modifiable variables. They're called that because if you modify them or change them, then they change or modify the outcome or the adaptation. So you can think about this as there's this wonderful acronym called COVAVER. Of course, I spent 15 hours or something on our series with Andy Huberman going over this stuff. So if you want a lot more detail, go there. We don't have that kind of time today, I believe.
Right. No.
Okay, great. So I'm going to cut some corners. Okay. I also have a billion free YouTube videos up that just walks you through all these things and
amazing
graphics and all that stuff. So you guys can all go there and check that out. So if I skip something or don't get there, you have other resources to get all the answers you want, all totally free. No subscriptions or anything to you.
Amazing.
All right. So with these modifiable variables, this is called COVAVER, right? The exercise scientists were great at coming up with cool acronyms.
All sorts of acronyms.
That stands for choice, which refers to the choice of the exercise. In other words, to frame this properly, the exercise you choose won't change the adaptation. So just because you do box jumps doesn't mean you're going to get powerful, right? You have to actually do them powerfully. Just because you do squats, you're not going to get bigger legs. You have to do it in the hypertrophy style, right? But the exercise you choose is the first variable that will modify things like which muscles are being activated, which sequence is being activated, what movement pattern, what range of motion you're in. So the first thing I want to think about is what exercise am I choosing? COVAVER, right? C-O. Next one is O for order, which is what order am I doing them? Am I doing squats first, then lunges, and then am I doing sprinting? And then am I going for a long swim? What am I doing? The order in which when you manipulate these exercises will influence the outcome you get.
Love it.
Choice, order, volume. This is reps times sets. So this is how many reps you're doing, how many sets are you totally doing. This is going to directly influence adaptation now, and I'll talk about that in a second. Intensity, which is a percentage of your 1 rep max, or if you're doing like cardiovascular or endurance exercise, you can think about this as percentage of your VO2 max or percentage of your max heart rate. If you're doing true speed work, then you might want to think of this as like percentage of max velocity, and intensity won't really work there. But for the most part, if you just like foundation level, just think about this as like percentage of my 1 rep max. What's the maximum amount I can lift one time? And then what percentage is that? So if my maximum bench press is 100 pounds and I'm lifting 70, I'm at 70% intensity. Just to keep it easy, right? You can get more complicated, but you get it.
Yep.
So choice, order, volume, intensity. Frequency is F. So this is how many days per week am I doing this? 1 time a week, 3 times a week, 10 days a week. So choice, choice, order, volume, intensity, frequency. And the last one is progression, which we don't need to like worry about like too much right now. So what you want to know is, what exercise do I pick? How many reps per set? How many sets do I do? How heavy should that be? How often per week? And then the last one here that really matters is rest, which is your rest intervals. How long do I rest in between sets and reps? And things like that. It's not days, that's frequency, right?
Yep.
So if you take a look at skill all the way to hypertrophy, you can then simply fill out a nice little matrix, which again, we spend all that time on here doing.
Yeah.
Walking you through all these variables and how they line up as you go across all the different adaptations you want. And the quick answer here is, the reason I laid that foundational information a few minutes ago was because if you realize what's actually happening, your choice in training becomes actually fairly intuitive. Here's what I mean. We talked about speed. Speed is something you have to do.
Yeah.
Underlying all these things is specificity wins. Don't overthink it, friends. Specificity wins. If we were playing, you said you played basketball, right, in Iowa? If we were playing basketball and coach said, we have got to get better at shooting layups with our left hand, the most specific thing and most effective thing you can ever do is shoot layups with your left hand. There's nothing that beats specificity. However, if all you ever did in practice was shoot left-handed layups, there would be a limitation there and eventually maybe causing asymmetries and burnout. So specificity should be the crown of your mountain, but it can't be the only thing you do, because that will lead to overuse and potentially other downstream problems. So the game we're playing here is, how do we maximize specificity while doing enough to not cause imbalances and injury, things like that. So if you want to get faster, you have to move fast. You have to move as fast as you can move, or faster. So if I'm doing a lot of repetitions in a row, what's happening to my speed of every rep? It's slowing down. So just intuitively, that's not a good strategy. You're not practicing going faster. You're practicing holding on to your pace until you get tired. That sounds like endurance, because it is.
Can I ask you a quick question just related to that, to speed? I think a whole lot about speed. This is I know that there's really good literature looking at, telomere length and master sprinters, in that, you can potentially attenuate the aging process by engaging in, sprinting. So these kind of short maximal efforts that you just described. So this is definitely something I build into my programming a ton. Like I played a sport where speed was really important, and I love that feeling of like running fast. But I think, as we, as our listeners are thinking about this and they're thinking about speed, there's obviously a strength component to that. So maybe if we've got folks who are thinking about, engaging in sprinting, knowing that, there's this really kind of tight connection between kind of losing speed and aging. So if we keep our speed, we potentially can kind of, slow down that aging process. If we're thinking about speed, what would you recommend from a strength perspective? Not to throw you off too much in terms of your progression here, but if we're just to sit, how do I set myself up so I can sprint without getting injured? And what type of strength training would you recommend to complement, going at maximal effort? Because people, once you kind of stop playing sports, people don't run as fast as they can anymore, right? But I would argue that that's like a really important thing to kind of try to maintain if you can. So what would you how does someone kind of strength train to ensure that they can maintain speed or kind of get back into running fast?
Look, the reason we're 20 minutes into this tangent here is, you sort of started off the conversation by saying, like, how do we train for longevity versus being an athlete, right? Like that was the crux of this entire conversation.
Right.
And where I'm going with all this is there is very little difference between the two. If you have a body, you're an athlete.
Yeah.
And you should train.
Love that.
I wish I could say I said it. I didn't.
Oh man, that is a good one. I'm going to write that down. I can't quote you though.
It's a famous.
Who said that?
It's Bill Bowerman, the co-founder of Nike.
Yeah. Okay.
Why that matters. If you look at the literature, and it's so awesome being an exercise scientist and saying this for so many years, and then the science eventually started to show up, and now all the longevity, people jump all over it, and all the doctors jump all over it, and I'm like, great.
I know,
awesome.
I know. We've been here for 2 decades, but welcome. Yeah.
Exactly. Here's what I mean. In order to, and this is like I've had so many of these conversations, especially more recently, like a lot of these conversations with Peter, because he's so focused on this stuff. And it's sort of like, yo, man, if we want to make ourselves the most resilient 100-year-old ever physically, what does that look like? And in my opinion, it looks like exactly what I've been laying out.
Yeah.
Exactly. All these adaptations I'm talking about, you have got to have if you want to be the most resilient 100-year-old physically you could be. Why? You want to be able to go sprint? What sort of strength training are you going to do? Well, you're going to do the training I'm about to outline. That's it. If you do that, you should be able to go sprint, no problem. Also, you should be able to you run for an hour or cycle or swim or whatever. Assuming your knee's fine, all that stuff, right? You should have some, because if you don't have enough muscle mass, this is going to be a problem. If you don't have enough strength, this is going to be a problem. If you don't have enough speed, this is going to be a problem. And so when you start to uncover and you look at the various studies that look at actual death or mortality as endpoint measures, right? Which is, in other words, like we're putting people in a study,
right?
And they end the study when these people die,
right?
Like we're going to see who lives longer.
Yeah.
And you start to see what are the things that predict mortality the most. Going back to the late 80s, 1990s, we started to realize with Stephen Blair's work, okay, VO2 max is a better predictor of mortality than things we classically thought of, like your cholesterol and blood pressure. Not to say that those things are not important or any of that stuff, but VO2 max was better. And it's like, well, obviously, like what I mean, this is the most direct function, or direct measure of function. Everything else are indirect measures based on an assumption to another assumption. Why don't you directly measure the functional capacity of the cardiovascular system? Okay, great. Research started evolving. People started asking questions about, what if there's strength in there? Like, what do you mean strength? Nah, you don't need, of course not, blah, 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 like you can just imagine those conversations for funding.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, in fact, not only is leg strength a predictor of mortality, it is catch the pun here, it is a stronger predictor of mortality than almost any other measure you'll see in a physician's office. In fact, if you stack it up directly next to VO2 max, depending on the study, oftentimes it is a stronger predictor than VO2 max.
Yeah, just
of all-cause mortality,
right? Because people,
everything
your legs are, the less you're gonna fall, and the more stability you have. Yeah.
It's not only that, but it's also there is such an incredibly high correlation between physical leg strength and physical activity,
right,
and cardiovascular system. So think about it this way: if you are walking upstairs at the airport, and every step is a 95% 1 rep max split squat for you, what do you think happens to your cardiovascular strength? Right, you're doing a VO2 max test every time you're walking. And here's the thing: it's not because you're cardiovascularly out of shape. It's because you're doing a 1 rep max every single step.
Right.
That's why. It's about falling and like risk falling, all that stuff's great.
Yeah.
But it's like, yo, if you're weak and it is a 1 rep max to stand up on the toilet, like, you can say your cardiovascular system's out of shape, but it ain't that. It's because that was a really damn hard effort.
Yeah.
And that took every muscle in your lower half to contract to get up. And so getting you stronger means that the world represents a very low percentage of effort instead of a very high percentage of effort. Yeah. So it's a direct thing. It's not just fall prevention.
Right.
You have to actually be strong there. So you then start throwing in the research on grip strength. Same story. Wow. Interesting. You start looking at the research on foot. There you go. On foot speed.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Totally.
Great. You start looking at muscle quality versus muscle size. There is not as good of a relationship between mortality with muscle size as there is strength. Strength is the big thing. But muscle size, because we said that is correlated here, it is important. And so it's like, well, wait a minute, look at this thing you outlined. I have to have good fitness. I have to have enough muscle mass. I don't have to be super jacked, but I have to have enough. I have to be strong. I have to be fast and powerful. And then if I don't move well and things are constantly being hurt, and I don't do any of those other 4, this becomes a problem. This is the exact outline we've been covering.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, it is you better damn well do all of these things.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to take. And if you do that, you can go sprint and not be worried about tearing your hamstring.
Right.
You can go do whatever you want to do. You can go do that 3-mile hike. You can go pick up basketball. You do whatever you want because you're resilient against all things. And that's going to be the target for longevity. And it's really cool because now, again, you have medical doctors like Peter Attia, like saying, wait a minute, this is the medical approach. And it's like, yeah, bro, welcome to 1992. Like, yes. Like,
I know.
Us strength coach dorks have been saying this for 30 years. And you realize that like telling your clients to just go walk for their cardiovascular fitness was like probably not
going to cut it.
But,
yeah.
No.
It's better than doing nothing,
of course,
for sure. But
totally.
Yeah, we need to get heavyweights in people's hands. There's no question about it. Would you say, okay, so there's, if we just think about it just from like core exercises, again, if you're saying, all right, if you're going to lift, you're committing to lifting 2 to 3 times a week, what would you recommend folks do in terms of volume,
like prescription
intensity? Yeah. Like kind of what would you prescribe? Again, if we're thinking about, I want to be able to like go run in the yard with my kids. I want to go, play a pickup game basketball. I want to get on the tennis court and I want to do these things and not injure myself. How do I set myself up from a strength perspective to just, kind of get, what's the MVP in terms of like, what do I need to get the most viable kind of, lowest level to get me to where I need to be.
Great. So this is not easy because of all the stuff we've covered. Number 1, you want to stay injury free. You have to train your connective tissue to absorb and produce force. Period. Right. If you don't do that, you're going to step on that basketball court. The first time you take a little jump and land, your Achilles is going to say, well, we haven't done this eccentric stretch at this speed in a long time. Goodbye. Right. So connective tissue needs to be trained. 2, you need to then do some small amount of basic strength training to be able to produce more force. Also, we talked about how that's a heavy overlapped hypertrophy. So that's going to put you on some muscle mass, but not like a ton if you don't want it. You do those things and you're pretty much set. You can go do whatever you'd like to do, right? So what's this look like? 2 to 3 days a week. You're going to do mostly full body workouts. You don't need to worry about doing your classic bodybuilder muscle group splits. So don't do shoulders today and quads tomorrow and like be in the gym for like, I love that stuff for hypertrophy, highly effective, but for this model you outlined, you don't need to do that, okay? So you want to generally focus on bigger movements. So this is the lower body and the upper body. We tend to think about things in a couple of movement planes. So hinging, or like bending over. This is what they are. So when you're lengthening kind of the muscle, and then you want to think about pressing. So this is pushing things away from you. So the upper body, there's pressing overhead, and there's pulling down overhead like a pull-up. There's horizontal pressing, you're pushing things away from you like a bench press, and then there's horizontal pulling, so like a bent row pulling things to you, and then some sort of thing. So you want to do some of these that are what we call bilateral. So a bench press on a barbell. So both arms are bilateral, so both sides are moving at the same time. You want to do some of these unilateral, which means maybe like a one arm, one dumbbell press, and then the other arm, right? So this is symmetries and things like that. Do that for the upper body and the lower body. So you do maybe one squatting movement. Maybe this is a goblet squat. You hold the dumbbell in front of your chest and you squat down. All right. And that's bilateral lower body. And then maybe you do one bilateral lower body hinge. Maybe like a kettlebell swing. Maybe an RDL. Great. Then maybe you pick one movement that is unilateral, or there's different ways to describe it. Let's call it unilateral. And so maybe this is like a lunge, or a split squat, or a step up, or something like that. Okay. And exercise science dorks, don't freak out. I'll just call those unilateral. Okay. But where they're both legs aren't in the same spot at the same time, right? Great. So those are 3 exercises you just did for your lower body. And then maybe you do, again, 1 or 2 for the upper body. You do a dumbbell bent row, and then you do an overhead press with dumbbell. Something like that, okay? You do that. That's 5 exercises. Before that, you do 1 or 2 exercises for speed and eccentric landing. So maybe this is, a couple of box jumps. Maybe this is stepping off of blocks and landing. Maybe it's just vertical jumps. Maybe it's broad jumps. That's fine. Do a few broad jumps. Just get the body lower, used to lowering, things like that. Easy. So if you were to spend a couple of minutes doing, 3 or 4 repetitions, and you do 3 or 4 sets of these broad jumps, you get warmed up. This is after your warm up, by the way. And you jump as far as you can, kind of walk back, jump as far as you can, walk back. And you do 3 of those. You take a little break, and maybe you do like a shoulder stretch or work on that neck thing your physical therapist wanted you to work on or whatever. And then you come back and you do another set of 3 jumps. You do 3 sets of that. Then you go on and you do your goblet squat. And while you're resting, same thing. You do 3 to 5 reps. While you're resting from your goblet squat, you do your overhead pressing. And you kind of go back and forth between those 2, 3 or 4 sets, 3 or 4 reps each. Maybe a little, maybe 5, 6, 8 reps. Anything between like this 3 to 10 rep range is going to be this combination of like strength and hypertrophy, right? Great. 3 to 4 sets each.
And
then you do your other leg exercise.
How hard should that feel to folks? If they're not used to, they don't know their max, or just kind of picking up weight and feel like, okay, this feels heavy. Like, yeah.
I think the way to think about this is what we use called reps in reserve. And so this is like, if the maximum you could do in a set is 10 at that weight, maybe do 8. So you should finish your set thinking like, this is really hard, really hard. I probably could do 1 or 2 more, but that would be absolutely it.
Right.
There's no way. And maybe like even on the second one, I can maybe do it, but I'm going to lose a lot of technique. My back's going to round. My foot's going to get out of position. My elbow's going to flare up.
Yeah, stop.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then you finish all that stuff. And then you could do a couple of isolation exercises if you want. So if you really want to get your biceps, great. You want to go do some calf raises, a body part, great. Now, you could go over the exact sets and reps. But in this particular case for this person, what you want to think about is starting off extremely conservatively and then progressing over time. And this is the key, because that question you asked about how heavy, it's going to figure itself out.
Right.
It won't. You just don't worry about it week 1. Don't worry about it week 2. Start lower than you think. Jot down how many reps you did, how much rest you took, how much weight you used. And next time, go a little bit heavier. 5% each week. Sometimes that's 5 pounds. Sometimes that's 1 pound. Sometimes that's 50 pounds, right? There's 5% or so each week in load. Give it 3 or 4, 5 or 6 weeks, and you're going to start to figure out like, whoa, that was way too big of a jump. I couldn't do that. I can get to there. It won't take you very long. I mean, I could give you like the textbook numbers, but it is really just comes down to fundamentally that. Because the biggest thing in this realm to continuing adaptations is what we call progressive overload. It's not necessarily the weight and the reps. That stuff doesn't matter as much. What matters is you are progressing most weeks. Doesn't have to be every single week. But you can't do the same workout. You can't do the same reps, same set, same weight every single week for years on end. You're not going to get any adaptations. So you have to continue to introduce stress.
Progressing in terms of either volume or weight.
You can progress in any of the variables I talked about.
That's good, right?
Any of them can be progressed. It can be exercise choice. So you can modify, and you can go from a goblet squat to a barbell squat, and you can progress intensity or complexity, right? Anything like that. You can reduce your rest intervals. Same exact workout, same rep, same set, same weight. Rest less in between. That's a progression. You could do more total sets. You could do more days per week.
What adaptation does that facilitate? Just for folks.
Depend whatever you're training.
Yeah.
It's gonna be global conditioning is what it's gonna be. So your ability to reduce or produce the same workout and recover faster.
Amazing.
Is what's gonna happen, right? Right. If you're training for strength and you do more volume, you're gonna get stronger. If you're training for hypertrophy, you do more volume, you're gonna get more muscle growth.
Right.
If you practice more at speed work and you do more practice there, you're gonna get faster. Faster. Right? Like it just doesn't matter like what you're after. So you could improve, change reps per set. You could change loads. Like any of these things can be done. I would recommend just picking 1 at a time, maybe 2 as your progression strategy. If you start moving 3 or 4 things and it's sort of like chaos kind of happens, but really it won't take you more than a month or 2 to start to figure out what load you can handle well, you can. And if like, yo, I'm trying to go heavier here, but I can't do it, but you want to go heavier, maybe you start taking more rest.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you do less sets or less reps per set, so you can go heavier. This is all tug, right? Tug back and forth. So the last thing I'll say here is like, just think about the big picture in terms of if your specificity, if you really want to focus on strength, the amount of weight on the bar is most important. The volume is not, right? So you're better off going heavier and doing less exercises, okay, per strength, because that's specificity, right? You're practicing a heavier load. If you want to train for hypertrophy, it's the opposite. You got to have some load there, but volume is going to be your driver. So don't put extra weights on because you're like excited to get there and then only get 1 or 2 reps. That's not going to drive maximal hypertrophy. Stick to volume. If speed is the game or power is the game, then don't worry about all reps. Don't worry about short rest intervals. Don't worry about your recovery. You have to go powerful and fast. And if that's all you remember from today, that's enough. Think about the adaptation and think what's the most specific thing here, and then modify your variables to maximize that thing. If you just want a little bit of all of it, then do a little bit of all of it. Do a little bit of speed stuff at the beginning while you're fresh. Go fast, but don't do a lot. Then do some strength stuff. Go high quality, real high force production, but don't do a ton. And then finish that workout if you'd like, doing a few sets or a few exercises for hypertrophy. Get a good pump, get a good sweat going, and get out of there. You got a little bit faster, you got a little bit stronger, and you build some muscle.
I love it. That's super clear, Andy. And I like you kind of addressed order inside that as well. If we're to kind of think about just frequency, so not inside the session, but just looking at across a week, if we're lifting 3 times a week, would you recommend 48 hours in between session? Like, how, and over the course of, 8 days, or, how do you think about the stretch, spacing the sessions out? And is this different for how you train your MLB and NFL athletes?
Oh yeah. Like those are all different
Totally
stories
Yeah.
entirely.
They're lifting every day, different body parts, probably, I would imagine.
No, definitely not.
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. Tell
No,
us.
definitely not at all.
What's the difference there, and what do you recommend?
I mean, for the athletes, it depends on if they're in season or preseason or postseason.
Yeah.
We almost never do body part split training. Like we're training athletes, we're not training fitness and figure sort of competitors.
Right. You're not trying to get better at exercising.
Yeah, no, we're training movements. We're not training muscle groups, unless we have like a specific thing we're trying to work on. So this is quite different. They also have skill development requirements. Right. So like they got to be out there hitting, and they got to be out there pitching, and they got to be out there like running routes and all that stuff. So it's a totally different setup. But for this individual, what I'd say is I wouldn't worry too much about it if you're doing things on the first end of the spectrum. So skill has almost no residual fatigue, meaning you could do it every single day. Speed and power, same answer. If it worked out in your schedule where you did Monday and Tuesday and then Friday, fine. Wouldn't matter if you're only training speed or power. Strength is actually fairly similar. It's a little bit less so true. You're going to get more fatigue and more sore. And if you're doing the similar movement patterns, then you may want to space it out. It wouldn't particularly matter. There's no magic 48, 72 hours. Hypertrophy, now you probably want at least 48 hours, maybe more realistically 72 hours between training sessions. So hypertrophy does require cellular recovery. The previous ones, since there's not a lot of volume, it's not a huge amount to recover. If you look at our power lifters, and then more specifically weightlifters, I mean, they're going to squat every day.
Yeah.
Like these are some of the best athletes in the world are getting stronger. Now it takes some time to get there, but like you can train those qualities every day. You wouldn't want to do that if you're trying to maximize muscle size though. So it just depends on the goal you're after.
So muscle size, how much time do you recommend it kind of in between session?
Again, 48 to 72 hours is probably the session for that muscle group.
Gotcha. Right.
Like for that muscle, right?
So if you just lift every day, obviously. And
totally.
Just change the body. Yeah, body part.
Yep. Like I did a bunch of work, lower body stuff on Monday, or we're recording this on Wednesday, and my hamstrings are still like extremely tender right now. but not the target here, but that's just was a consequence. So
Right.
I didn't train them yesterday. I'm not going to train them today. I still trained. I did other stuff. Did the assault bike, did some other stuff. I still did legs, quote unquote. I just didn't do any hamstring specific, barbell, dumbbell training stuff because like they're still too sore. I'm probably going to lift tomorrow with them, but I'm not going to do a bunch of hamstring specific stuff. So I will squat. I'll do some leg presses. I'll do some other things, but I'm not going to do hamstring curls tomorrow. Probably. If I do, it'll be very light just to like move. Because the reality is I overshot it Monday. It's like, oops. All right, shit. Like, this is going to cost me some time. So I got to pull back a little bit.
And what do you do to kind of help accelerate recovery? Are there any specific modalities that you found to be really useful after a super hard day? Or, if you are just that kind of person you want to train every day, are there things that you can do to kind of help facilitate that?
Yeah, totally. If you want to exercise every day, you can. You just have to set your program up appropriately, which is no problem whatsoever. I mean, I'm generally going to be trying to exercise every day.
Yeah,
it obviously doesn't happen, but like that's the target because you don't know the next day's guaranteed. So like if you have a chance, go do something, right? Like hashtag children, right? Like plans.
Yeah.
So take your chance. When you get your chance, you
little
take
buggers get in the way.
Worse.
In the best way.
Travel and plane flights get delayed. Just all kinds of stuff, things like that. So the way that you want to kind of think about this is you want to set it up for, as frequently as you can. If you get extremely sore, then this becomes a problem because now you're going to miss 3 or 4 or 5 days. So on the question of soreness, not that you asked that, but this is going to fold in here. You don't want to maximize your soreness for most people because it's just going to delay training too much. And so you also don't want to be in a position where you're never getting sore. You're probably not training hard enough. And so you want to feel like maybe 3 out of 10 on the level of soreness, like the next day and the day after. Sort of like, whew, okay, like I'm a little tight there. All right. But not like, oh my God, I can't sit in the toilet. Like oh my God, I can't sit down for 3 days. Like you don't want that's not a good spot to be in. So your training will enhance your recovery. So you heard me say like my hamstring was super sore yesterday. I still rode the bike a little bit. A little light physical activity is number 1. Number 2, of course, is sleep. In fact, this is obviously number 1. Getting very consistent, high quality sleep and just dialing that in is like by far the biggest, like by far your biggest strategy for recovery. Secondly, I mean, the honest answer is all of our athletes are on extremely high precision nutrition. These are micronutrient based nutritions. We do like extensive blood work, urine, saliva, stool, a ton of physiological testing, and they're on very high precision nutrition and extremely high precision supplementation stuff. So that's all going to be dialed in. So their physiology is going to be cruising to get recovery. If you still need stuff on top of that, then of course we can go thermal stuff. So we can do sauna and or hot water and or ice bathing or contrast or something like that, which are effective for muscle soreness. They're also very effective. We've done a ton of stuff with HRV on these things, and the ice in particular is outstanding at improving both acute and chronic heart rate recovery and global fatigue. So it's very, very good for that. Yeah. We can do a whole bunch of things
there as well that I think is really powerful for athletes.
Oh yeah. For anybody. In fact, we have a giant list of what I call acute and chronic recovery modalities. And so there are some where it's just like, you wake up and you're just like not great today, whether that is like sore or don't feel like it or physiologically. Yeah. And then there's a bunch where it's like, we're gonna have to dig you out of the hole. And those acute ones can range from everything like very specific beat frequencies for music. So change the beat frequency and you can or cadence. So different types of music can get you out of that stuff. Yeah. There are brain games we can do. There are tricks. There are food items we can give you. And there are some that are more geared towards like breath work, things like that are either acute and chronic. So we have tons of different tricks we can pull out for the person that we can use to enhance recovery. But so yeah, there's all kinds of tools that can be everything from even sunlight or even in some particular cases red light therapies to things like arc waves and Mark Pros for like acute muscle soreness and just like all kinds of different technology tricks.
Yeah.
To giving them like their favorite home cooked meal, if you will.
Yeah.
like you know what I mean? Like
comfort food. Yeah.
Comfort food. That's a word. Yeah. It's like they love Pepsi.
Yeah.
I love Pepsi. Like, what? Oh yeah. Okay. Like like the weirdest thing.
Right.
So there's like all kinds of acute and chronic tricks, but sleep would be by far the biggest foundation.
Cool.
Sleep and then the high precision nutrition supplementation is going to take care of the vast majority of the stuff.
Yeah, love it. I just want to talk, we've been talking really globally, which is, I think, super beneficial. Is there anything specific for women that you would recommend, just on the strength training side, different phases of kind of the reproductive life? Is there kind of any high level thoughts that you have, for women specifically?
You mean like sort of pre, mid, post menopause, the
Yeah. So,
differentiation, things like
I
that? Or you
think
mean
kind
like
of,
actually within a menstrual cycle, like a 30-day window?
so yeah, great question. And yeah, so I'd say we've talked a lot about menstrual cycle, maybe kind of getting, older women, on the perimenopause,
Yeah.
menopause track. Anything that you would recommend to kind of help, mitigate some of the negative impacts of just that transition?
Yeah. So there's a lot to say. Unfortunately,
Yeah, I know
we're
we're
too
really over
short on
time.
time to
Yes.
dive into a giant question like this.
Yes,
There
I
is a
know.
lot of stuff. I guess one of the things that pumps up really quickly, just because we've been, um, my former student Lauren Colenso Semple just published a really nice paper yesterday
Wow.
on, yesterday.
Wow.
I wasn't involved in the paper. It was her and other group. But it is the updated evidence on the evidence base for changing your exercise training based on your menstrual cycle. And then so
Mm,
you can read more about that. That paper just came out. And so it just walks you through again the state of the evidence on that, and then you can make your
awesome.
own decisions about
Yeah.
changing
Yeah.
that. Obviously, it's totally dependent on women, right? Like this,
Yeah.
some women need to take into account some.
Mhm.
The other thing I'll throw out here again, just as like a quick one, is one of the things that we've dealt with in our rapid health optimization and performance
Mhm.
company. We deal with a lot of women in this age range, 40 to 60.
Mhm.
So we deal with a lot of pre and mid and perimenopause. And one quick thing we do, and it's all individualized, all that, but one thing that's pretty ubiquitous is temperature regulation at night
Mm.
is so hard.
Yeah.
And so this is what, and I don't have any affiliation with these companies, but then
Right.
this is when you get something like a Doc Pro,
Mhm.
and you get that on your bed, and you can actually have complete control of your temperature at night. You can make it different settings
Mhm.
throughout the different things, and you can actually use your sleep tracker to look at your changes in
Mhm.
temperature throughout the night, and then you can set your Doc Pro to be at certain temperatures at
Mhm.
certain night.
Yeah.
And so it's like not hard at all to figure out. And this has been like overnight life changers for
Yeah.
for some women. So that is another like one like quick thing. Of course, even work with your
Yeah.
medical team and stuff, to get your supplementation and all that dialed in.
Yeah.
But that's one that like women are like, some depends on what's going on, but a lot of people are like, oh my God,
No,
this
and
is
this
changing
is,
my life.
yeah, I mean, this is just, my PhD work is in circadian physiology things. And,
Oh, dope. I didn't know.
yes, and one of the, very, one of the established principles is just this dissociation between your sleep wake cycle and your body temperature, and that's really what happens, for
Yep,
women and definitely in perimenopause, menopause, who are kind of going through that temperature changes, like it. There's that really clear disassociation. I mean, it's even people with jet lag and social jet lag, and but that's where, but we feel really, really crappy, really, really fast, and if
totally,
we can somehow get that realigned, life gets better, real quick. So yeah,
totally,
that's
totally.
such a great, I'm so happy that you hit on that, because I think that is pretty actionable for most folks.
Yep.
um all right, Andy, just to close this out, I appreciate your time so much. What are your three best tips you would give someone who is looking to optimize their strength training journey?
Yeah. Tip number one would be make sure you're focusing on that progressive overload, right? So continuing to press either on the weight you're using or something like that. So there. Tip number two would be at all cost, spend and invest the time in moving correctly. You have to move correctly, especially for the long haul. And it's the third time I mentioned him, just because we've been doing this. Is something Peter and Atia and I've chatted about a lot. He's told the story of taking a year off. He took a year off from deadlifting, not because he blew out his back or anything like that, but he just like, we get little back injuries and things like that, and it just like kind of hurt a little bit for a while. And he took a year off, worked with his coach, rebuilt a lot of his mechanics in his toe and his other stuff. And a year of just doing this little stuff. And now he deadlifts constantly, no pain whatsoever, no joints nagging him anywhere. And he's going to continue rubbing it up for many, many years. And so it's just like, if you think about this from the big picture, and you're like, yo, you want to be healthy for the next 50 years. Who cares about a year? Who cares about 6 months, years? It's an obvious answer. So that would be my second biggest tip, is like really invest in moving so nothing hurts. You shouldn't be 50 and have all kinds of pain. Like, that's not normal. And it doesn't have to be that way. The third one I would say is make sure you are exploring things outside of the barbell and dumbbell. This is all of our attention. This is all of our focus, but you are not going to probably be in your best position if all you do is sit on machines or use dumbbells and squats. Right? There's so much to human movement. Whether you want to go as crazy or other movements, like, don't forget you're a human. Your positions and rotation and twisting, and there's just so many ways to train your body physically. Exercise, or even quote unquote strength training, gymnastics, and like so much stuff to do. That should be in your scope of training as well. So those would be my three biggest tips.
I love it. It's beautiful. Thank you for that. And just thank you for all the work that you're doing to educate folks on these principles. And I think it's inspiring so many. And yeah, well, you are such a great resource. Thank you again. Appreciate this time. And hopefully we'll get to chat again soon.
All right. Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks again to Dr. Andy Galpin for joining the show and sharing his expertise on strength training and musculoskeletal load. If you enjoyed this episode of the Whoop Podcast, be sure to leave a rating or review. Please subscribe to the Whoop Podcast. Check us out on social @Whoop, @WillAhmed. If you have a question you want to see answered on the podcast, email us, podcast@whoop.com. Call us, 508-443-4952. New members can use the code WILL, get a $60 credit on accessories. And that's a wrap, folks. Thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next week on the Whoop Podcast. Stay healthy and stay in the